Hello, everybody. This is Terence Moore for Terence's Take, the week of Monday, February 25th, 2019. Listen, people, we are days. Can you believe this? We are days away from the conference championships for college basketball, which means that March Madness is just around the corner. And you cannot talk March Madness unless you talk to the college basketball expert, DeShaun Tate. How you doing, DeShaun?
I'm outstanding, man. Just probably about, 4 or 5 more days left until we get into my time of the year, man. Some 94 feet on campus, some college basketball. I've sat back, Terence. I've been patient. I've waited patiently and, just kind of stayed inside of my own box, stayed inside of my own squares, I like to call it, while all the football stuff is going on. Now it's time to start transitioning and me getting into my elements of good old college basketball. Thanks for having me.
And I'll tell you, if you guys have not heard DeShaun before on this show and elsewhere, he is outstanding. I mean, he knows everything there is. I mean, literally, he knows everything there is about college basketball, and that's because he just devours it. 94.9 a game he works for here in Atlanta, Georgia, and he does a lot of other stuff. And before we get started to the meat and potatoes, I just got to ask you this. I mean, there are more than 350 Division I basketball programs out there. And how many of those do you pay attention to during the course of a college basketball season, particularly now that we're getting down the stretch?
All 351. That's the most simple and plain answer that I have for you. Every single last bit. From the high majors to the mid majors, the Power 5 conferences, NAIA, you name it, Division I, II, I'm all over the place.
Yeah, I figured as much. And, we're going to get right to it because we're marching to Zion. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, not so much now because Zion Williamson, the star of Duke, well, you guys all know what happened, okay? His sneaker exploded. His Nikes, literally, it did. It fell apart in a game against North Carolina earlier this week. And he's been out, and they say it's a minor knee sprain, his right knee, even though it was his left shoe that exploded, his right knee got injured. So the first thing I wonder about DeShaun, several things about Zion, but the obvious thing is Duke is ranked number 1 in the AP poll and also in the coaches poll. How can Duke survive with him out very much or at all? And I'm going to get to the at all in a minute, but how much? In other words, how dependent is Duke on this guy, even though they got those other guys, if they want to go far into March Madness and the Final Four?
Well, they definitely can survive. I think that changes things a little bit with Zion's absence in terms of winning a national championship, perhaps. And I'm not the person to say that there's 0% chance because that's not the case. But the fact of the position that he plays and how much he's relied upon on this team, I do think that he is definitely missed. And if you couldn't tell so by the game against North Carolina, then I don't know what could really show anybody. But they did have a win in a game against Syracuse over the weekend, and they came away with a victory without Zion. I think one of the biggest difference makers, something that people aren't really thinking about, is the fact that when you give Coach K an opportunity to prepare, then he can come away with those wins. And obviously, in a case where he was expecting to have Zion Williamson, and he went down in that game and was slow to make the adjustment. It was the same thing with losing Trey Jones, another freshman starting point guard, in their game against Syracuse the first time at Cameron Indoor, and they lost that one. But they did at the same time have a completely healthy team when they took that loss to Gonzaga. So I think I really do truly believe that with a little bit of some preparation, then there's not nearly as much concern as there is when he doesn't have that opportunity to prepare. But certainly losing Zion Williamson, you can see on the faces of a lot of his teammates, they just really, really wasn't sure what to do in his absence. And now they have an opportunity to, kind of get together and make some adjustments and figure out what to do from there. I think that Duke overall over time will be just fine, especially when he comes back.
And DeShaun was referring to the loss earlier in the season. Duke had to Gonzaga, and then, of course, they got murdered at Duke by North Carolina earlier this week. They're 23-2, so they're pretty well positioned. But here's the other Zion Williamson question that everybody's wondering about. You know, you've got all these people, a lot of NBA players, telling him that he should shut it down now. Of course, Zion Williamson, a freshman at Duke, and people are thinking about his draft status coming up in the summer for the NBA, and they're saying, hey, just hang it up, dude. I mean, what do you got to prove? I mean, what side of the fence are you on with that? Do you think he should hang it up, or do you think he should go ahead and, for good old Duke, try to win a national championship?
I really think that it just kind of depends on the person that you are. You know, are we speaking in terms of what would you do as a person if you were Zion? What would you do as a person if you were Zion's parents?
Well, let's do it this way. What do you think Zion should do?
I think from a business standpoint, I think that Zion should shut it down, and that's probably a little surprising for me because of the fact that what he brings to college basketball. When you start thinking about, you know, the excitement of college basketball and all these other things, it almost seems impossible to think about what the college looking at things in a broader light of what college basketball would be like without him. It definitely would not feel the same, and I wouldn't want to put any asterisks on the games that Duke wins or loses, because I think that's unfair simply because injuries are a part of the game. However, I like the idea of him coming back. He's the ultimate competitor. He is probably the most competitive guy in college basketball this season. I would like to see him come back, especially if for nothing else. If Duke takes a loss in his absence, then it's going to have those asterisks, and I'm not a big fan of that. So I would definitely like to see him come back, and wishing him well to come back. But from a business standpoint, I definitely think that he should sit, because you look at it, you mess up that knee one more time. Zion Williamson has not had a full, healthy season of basketball from start to finish since his sophomore year of high school. Exactly. And so from that standpoint, when you're looking at it, you've already got those health issues. You've got that concern, bothering of the knees and things of that nature. He's already 285 pounds, so he's carrying a lot of weight. These are all the things that you have to take into consideration. But there's not one single doubt in my mind that Zion Williamson will come back, because he loves playing for Duke and he wants to win a national championship.
Yeah, DeShaun, you just said something very interesting that I was not aware of, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners to this podcast are not aware of. You talk about Zion Williamson's injury history with high school. Now, everybody's blaming this injury, and I'm sure that people have seen this clip of how it happened before. And if you haven't, Google, okay? It's right there. And everybody's talking about Nike, you know, it's a stock took a big hit because of this type of thing. Could have been more so Zion than the sneaker that caused this problem. I mean, if the guy is injury prone and he does carry a lot of weight, was it anything that he did more so than the shoe malfunctioning?
I think that is certainly a combination of both, to be quite honest. It doesn't help the fact. I mean, the malfunction within the shoe, I think it's something that happens. He's not the first person that it's happened to, where a shoe kind of blew up, as I like to kind of think of it. But I'm sure that the 285 pounds that he's carrying doesn't help. And not only the fact of his weight, but the way that he plays with a lot of cutting and a lot of athleticism.
Sure.
And, you know, just his style of play. I'm sure that doesn't help the case at all. But it's certainly one thing that you definitely want to consider when you're talking about, you know, everything that happened within that injury. When you're looking at it, to be quite honest, Terence, you know, when you got a guy who's not necessarily finished a full healthy season since in about 2 or 3 years, how much of that was due to a knee injury, and that also, you know, plays a part as well, because that was the case with a couple of those injuries. So it's something that you kind of got to keep in mind, and you certainly have to consider those things.
You know, moving on, you look at the AP top 10. You got Duke, and in this order, by the way, folks. You got Duke, Gonzaga, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Nevada, Michigan, North Carolina, Houston, Michigan State. And the coaches poll is virtually the same way. And by the way, just so you guys know, we're talking to the ultimate Michigan State fan, not me, I'm Notre Dame, and DeShaun. And the only difference between the AP poll and the coaches poll, at least as we speak, is at number 10, they have Marquette as opposed to DeShaun's Michigan State Spartans and everything. But here's the question I've got for you. I got several here. But the first one I got, I mean, there are three teams in that group that some people might consider a paper tiger, or should I say, paper bulldog, or paper wolfpack, or paper cougar. All right, let's start with the potential paper bulldog. All right, Gonzaga's ranked number 2. They're 25-2. I mean, they're destroying people. The only thing is, they play in a conference that's just slightly better than your average high school league. How seriously should we take Gonzaga?
I think Gonzaga should definitely be taken, seriously. That for sure, without a question or a doubt in mind. This is a team that went to a national championship game within the last 2 years, and so and before then, I think that there's some cases where they haven't been able to get the job done, and it kind of reminds me of Virginia a little bit, just based on the fact that Virginia has does so well within the regular season.
Sure.
But when it comes time to the brackets coming out in the NCAA tournament, they don't do nearly as well, and they lose a little early. Got that early exit, but that's not the case for Gonzaga. Gonzaga has that history. They have experienced players. They have a really, really good coach in Mark Few. So when you're looking at all of these things all across the board, Gonzaga's a team that's certainly a contender. I don't think that they will be a national champion, that they will play for a national championship or win the national championship, rather. I do certainly think that you're crazy if you don't believe that Gonzaga can get to the Final Four again, especially in a situation, a case like this, because it's March. We're approaching March. Everybody knows this. There's so much unpredictability, things that people aren't thinking about. When you look at it, Terence, when you're looking at the NFL, you can almost guarantee that the Patriots are going to be there.
Yeah.
When you're looking at college football, you can almost guarantee Alabama or Clemson or someone's going to be there. When you're looking at the NBA, you can almost guarantee that the Golden State Warriors is going to be there along with whatever team LeBron James is playing on. But when you're looking at college basketball, that's the most unpredictable time of the year. That's why I like it to be the best 3 weeks in sports. I can't wait for it.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said for what you're saying there, and then and I can go with you with Gonzaga, but now you got those other two paper tigers or paper wolfpack and paper cougars with in Nevada. Okay, I mean in Nevada, both Nevada and Houston, they've Nevada's lost once, Houston's lost once. Nevada 24-1, Houston 25-1. Nevada's ranked 6 in the current AP poll. Houston's ranked 9th. How seriously should we take these people?
I think they should definitely be taken seriously. Actually,
Really?
Just the other day, San Diego State came away with a win against Nevada, so there will be a little bit of a different look in the AP poll. But I will say enough to say that there's still 2 teams that should be taken seriously. Nevada went all the way to the Sweet 16 last year. You've got to consider them with everything that they're bringing back. They've got 5 seniors, a really good coach in Eric Musselman, who has taken this team that have improved every single year. His first year there a few years ago, they win the not the BPI, but the CBI, and then they go from there and then winning getting to the NCAA tournament and winning a game. And then last year they go to the Sweet 16 and win. They got 5 seniors there. Obviously, everybody talks about Caleb and Cody Martin, the twins, but they got a little bit more than that. Maybe not the deepest bench, the most talented teams, much like Houston. However, they have a really good and experienced starting 5. These are just a couple of the things. When you start, we call this a free space on the Tate's Take bingo card right here, Terence. The reality is when you're looking at teams, when you're filling out that bracket that you want to take in advance, you have to consider a combination of 3 things. One of those things is the coaching. How well of a coach that you have, what kind of experience they have under their belt. They have that, both teams, between Eric Musselman and Kelvin Sampson. You have to go deep on your bench. Roster depth makes a huge difference. And then senior-led teams. I just told you Nevada has 5 of them that they start, including Jordan Caroline, who doesn't get nearly enough recognition as an undersized big. I think that they both should be taken or considered to be very serious threats in the NCAA tournament. And even with this Houston team, they made a really good run last year all the way to the Sweet 16 before they were eliminated by a really good Michigan team. So those are 2 teams, although I don't think that they'll play for a national championship, because realistically, Terence, in the coming weeks, probably coming days, you're going to hear about 12 to 15 teams, blah, 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 that can win this whole thing. I don't think that that's the case. There's probably that many teams that can make the Final Four, but I don't think that there's that many teams that can win a national championship. It's only probably about a really good, strong handful handful of those teams. However, Houston and Nevada are both two teams that I think are realistic Final Four teams.
And we're going to end the podcast later on with your 3 or 4 teams to watch out for right now. Matter of fact, we'll make it simple. I'm going to ask you for your early Final Four prediction, but we'll save that for the end. But you just said something very interesting. You talked about how these teams, Nevada and Houston, and particularly Nevada, is senior led. And I saw a stat the other day. I'm not sure if you know what exactly the numbers are, but it mentioned that the last 3 Final Fours, I think they went 3 Final Fours back, that the number of teams in the Final Four, and certainly ones that were winning it, the number of upperclassmen compared to otherwise was overwhelming. I mean, it wasn't even close. And the number of freshmen who were playing it's almost like near zero. And that just makes your point even more so.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just one of those things a lot of people don't pay nearly enough attention to. When you're looking at these teams that win these national championships, not even just Final Fours, but even that national championships, everybody's running to go and get the quick one and dones and having all these crazy, making history with these talented rosters and best freshmen in the country. But that doesn't always equate into a national championship. I think the last time that we've seen a freshman led a team to a national championship was Duke in 2015. With Jones and Okafor, Winslow, those guys, but they still had seniors on those rosters. Even the one that Kentucky had when they were led by freshmen with Anthony Davis and company.
Right.
But they still had in 2012 a lot of seniors. That's one of the keys that you want to consider when looking at this Duke team, who's number one. They're the front runner to win a national championship, but they don't have a single senior on this team. And that's something that a lot of people don't know. Now, does that mean that they can't make history? Absolutely not. When you're looking at Duke and you're looking at all the national championships they've won, Coach K has won 5. 3 of them under the roof of Indianapolis. That's 2001, 2010, and 2015. The other 2 being 1992 as well as 2001. Believe it or not, those 2 were in Minnesota. The first 3 in Indianapolis, the other 2 in Minnesota. Ironically, the national championship game this year will be played in Minnesota. So one thing I want people to also understand and to consider is that you have to be able to have those experience-led teams. And when you're looking at the teams that have won it recently, Carolina in 2017 and Villanova in 16, Villanova last year in 18, these are senior-led or upperclassmen type teams that are leading these teams all the way to the promised land. And that's just one of those things I want people to just make sure that they're paying very, very close attention to. It needs to be the focal point when you're filling out that bracket.
Yeah, know something here, DeShaun. I can't believe I'm going to say what I'm about to say, but and tell me if I'm out in the ozone on this, and I've been known to do that from time to time. But even though these 2 teams I'm going to tell you about are in the top 10, and even though these 2 teams have had huge victories in the last week or so, I think that people are not paying enough attention to these 2 teams. One being Kentucky. Kentucky's ranked 4th in the country right now, AP and also coaches poll, 21-4, and they had that huge victory over Tennessee a couple weekends ago. And of course it was at Rupp Arena, but they just destroyed them. And then the other team is North Carolina. We just talked about North Carolina beating Duke. North Carolina is ranked 8th in the country. They're 20-5. I'm not sure that they're getting the due that they should be getting at this point. Is it just me, or is that the case?
That can be the case. I think it just kind of depends on who you ask. It's very rare that you hear of 2 blue bloods that don't necessarily get the recognition that they deserved or overlooked, if you will. But one thing about Kentucky, they're a freshman team, and a lot of people still kind of skeptical, including myself, as to not only about them being a team that can win the national championship, but even more so go to the Final Four, because they tend to disappoint so much.
Yes.
Coach Calipari has that. When you're looking at his recruiting classes, all the talent he's brought in, and all those other things that won national championship in 2012. When you're looking at the other times that he's been to the Final Four, he's dropped the ball and left these titles on the table. When you're looking at the John Wall and the DeMarcus Cousins year in 2008 in Calipari's first year, 2011 when they went to the Final Four, but UConn won it. Even the case where they went to the 38-0 team the 38-0 team in 2015 2016 when they fell to Wisconsin. I mean, they've had a lot of really good teams. That's something that I think is in the back of the minds of, if not other people, and certainly me and also the committee. They lost to Seton Hall this year on a neutral site. They also lost to Alabama on the road, two teams that, likely won't even get into the NCAA tournament at this point. They're certainly not locks. Mm-hmm. And they lost in the first game of the season to Duke by 34 points when Duke hung 118 points on them in Indianapolis. I was there for that one. So I think that as strong as Kentucky is, I think that they still have to be considered a team that still, has some red flags that are up in the minds of a lot of people. However, they have they did beat Tennessee, who was on a 19-game win streak. You have to give them credit for that, obviously, and they still have to go to Tennessee in the next week or so. So that'll be interesting. North Carolina being a team who maybe doesn't look like the Carolina of old, but they're going to score the ball. They're in the top 5 in the country of doing that. They're the number 1 rebounding team in the country. They usually always are. They don't have the talent that they usually always have, but they love to get out in transition and probably have the 2 best wins in the country more than anybody else. That is over Gonzaga earlier this year and over Duke, as we just talked about last week. So those are 2 teams that, depending on what side of the fence you're on, they're either being one of the more disrespected teams in the country or not. And I personally think I'm probably lying somewhere right there in the middle. I think those are 2 teams that can certainly get to the Final Four. But I wouldn't be surprised if neither one of them made it, just because of the fact that I think this year is a year for the mid-majors.
Well, you know what? And let's talk about 2 teams, about whether or not it's time to worry about them. All right. One of which you just talked about. All right, I mean, Tennessee had that horrific loss at Kentucky, and they lost yesterday at LSU. I know it was in overtime, but they still lost. I mean, and I know you're not a big Rick Barnes fan. And then the other team is Kansas. I mean, Kansas is not Kansas. Yeah, when we talked about this on the earlier podcast about whether or not they were in danger of that streak they had of winning their conference like 14 straight times in a row, which is just insane. But I mean, so is it time to worry about either of those teams, or just a bump in the road for them?
I think that there's probably a little bit more worry on Kansas' end, just because they returned 3 players in Sylvia D'Souza, as well as Udoka Azubuike and LeGerald Vick from last year's run to the Final Four. All 3 of those players are out for now. One of them, or potentially 2 of them, I think now are out for the remainder of the season, still undecided on what's going to happen with LeGerald Vick. And then they're, starting 2 guards in the backcourt that are freshmen, and so they don't have that experience that they thought that they would come in, that they thought that they would have, that they usually have. So from that standpoint, there is a little bit of reason for concern. You look at it, Kansas is one of those teams that you can almost guarantee, if you can name one team in the country, especially not named Duke, that you don't want to count out in the month going into the month of March and looking at Selection Sunday. They're always a team that's a number 1 seed going into the tournament. Like you said, 14 consecutive regular season championships in the Big 12. It's almost hard to go against them in the tournament. This is a case where I think you're not going to have that this year, and there's some reason to be concerned. Now, you mentioned how I'm not really the big Rick Barnes guy.
And that's another
down a little bit. And so I would definitely refrain from people taking Tennessee to get, either certainly past the Elite 8. I think that they're a team that, as well as they've done this year, it is certainly a huge disappointment and a bust of a season in a sense if they don't at least get to the Elite 8. It's Elite 8 or bust for this Tennessee team, and an underachievement, of a season if they don't at least get that far. But they don't have the same issues that Kansas has, because they have their starting players. Everybody's healthy. Nobody's hurt. Nobody's sitting because of NCAA infractions or any of those things. Tennessee's still tough because they're really experienced. I'm just not sold on Rick Barnes, because we talked about the 3 key things that can help a team get that a team needs to get to the promised land and get to the, through the NCAA tournament and make a deep run in March. I'm not sure that I can say that Rick Barnes is one of those coaches from a coaching standpoint that's not vulnerable to being outcoached, and that can play a huge, huge factor in a one-and-done situation in the NCAA tournament.
Well, I'll tell you what, DeShaun, we'll wrap it up with this because, you talk about this is a year, in your opinion, of the mid-major. And I'm not mad at you for that because, hey, I went to school at Miami of Ohio. In Oxford, Ohio, that's a mid-major in the ultimate mid-major conference, the Mid-American Conference. You can't get more mid-major than that, right?
Yeah, no, it doesn't get too much more. There's some sleepers out there. When you're looking at that conference, and you're looking at Ball State, and you're looking at Kent State, Central Michigan is decent. Obviously, Buffalo is a huge, one of the front runners in that conference as well. They've got some ball players in that conference, but no, it doesn't get much more mid-major than that. It has mid in its name. Mid-American. It has mid in its name. Doesn't get more mid than that.
But, having said that, and I just got grudgingly, I got to say this, there is a conference, arguably, that is theoretically more mid-major than that, even though I've got my bias toward the Mid-American Conference, and that is the Ohio Valley Conference. Very interesting development there. You got this John Morant. Is that how you pronounce his name?
John Morant, yeah.
This guy is like, just when you think you would never see another Trae Young, you do. This guy, Murray State, he's going wildfire scoring-wise and otherwise for Murray State of the Ohio Valley. Murray State is 23-4. They're 14-2 in the conference. But get this, folks. Belmont is also 23-4 and 14-2 in the conference. Mid-major, could we see one of these two teams, and particularly with Morant and his Murray State, could we see them in the Final Four or not?
I think Belmont wouldn't be more than likely to be the team that would do that. Not saying that John Morant isn't a wonderful talent, but I think from a team standpoint, which is what you need ultimately to get through this thing, it's certainly Belmont. I like the team that they have, and they always have a really good team. They always a high volume shooting team, high percentage, and they play really good defense, sound basketball. When you're looking at this thing, you're talking about the game development or fundamentally sound basic basketball. That's their style of play. The way that James Naismith created this thing back in 1891. That's the type of team that Belmont has. I really like what they're able to do in the OVC, obviously. But when you're looking at some of these other, and maybe not to the Final Four, but when you're looking for some sleepers and you're looking for some Cinderella teams, you start looking at in that conference with Liberty and Lipscomb, two of those being teams that only gets, it's a one-bid lead, so both of them are going to get in. Mm-hmm. Whoever comes out of that, I think, can certainly make some noise in the NCAA tournament for sure.
We're going to have DeShaun back often now between now and the Final Four and after the Final Four because, as you can tell, he's the man here. And we're going to close this particular segment with this. Your early Final Four, right now, and every time we have you on, I'm going to ask you this. Right now, who is your Final Four and who is your national champion?
You know what? I hate to disappoint the people, but I have to stick to my guns here, and I have to be honest. One thing I don't do is I don't give a national champion or
come on, man.
A Final Four. I hate to do it, but the thing is about this bracket is that you don't know until those seedings come out. When you find out, if you come and holler at me on the 17th of March and Selection Sunday, then we can have that kind of conversation. But you don't know. There's so much more basketball to be played. You have the remainder of the regular season. You have the conference tournament still to be played. All of these different things. So much is going to shake up between now and then. We don't know who's going to get what seeds and who's going to be paired in what brackets and what regions and all the above. But I will throw you this bone. There's two teams that I'm feeling extremely, extremely confident more than any of the others in the country.
Miami of Ohio and
I wish I could tell you that, but I can't. Okay. So out of all the other 349 teams, there's two that I feel very, very comfortable about. A healthy Zion Williamson and Duke getting to the Final Four at least. And I know this is going to come as quite a bit of surprise because they've disappointed so much, but I've been sticking to my guns. I said at the beginning of the season, I really think Virginia is a Final Four team this year. Ooh. National championship, I can't tell you that, but I think this is the year that they step it up and that they get past. They're feeling like really, really disrespected, especially after what happened last year when a 16 seed beat them as a 1 seed. I called that one out, by the way. I really, really believe that Virginia is that team. That is a lock from me, for me only on today. That is a lock for the Final Four in Minnesota.
Well, I'll tell you what, DeShaun, if I were a betting man, I would take you up on that Virginia thing, but I think I'll pass on that. But we're gonna have more of DeShaun in the future because you can tell that this is awesome, and we want to thank you for coming on today. And we'll be back next week for more Terence's Take. And next week, well, I'll let you be surprised. Anyway, we'll see you. We'll see you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Terence. At Tate's Take Sports, TATESTAKE Sports on the Twitter.
And make sure that you check that out because you'll be seeing some great, great stuff.